Here's our pot in progress out on the beta grid. Since we have made two different materials, we can go to Select Face, click on one, and change just one. So for example, if we wanted the dirt darker, we could do that. We could also click on the pot, go to Shininess, add a faux shiny layer, and have some shine if we wanted to. We could also change the color on that. So our pot looks pretty good at the moment, except that dirt is a little boring. It could have a little more oomph, I think, and perhaps we can tweak the exterior texture just a little bit. So let's go back into Blender and see what we can do with those nodes. A simple way to get some displacement or bumpiness, if you want to think of it that way, into your texture is to connect the image texture that you're using, in this case dirt, right here, with the yellow node, over to the displacement node in the material output. Now, it's probably hard for you to see unless you really zoomed up on your monitor, but there's lots of extra bumpiness in this texture now that wasn't there before. You'll be able to see that on your screen at home. These are the defaults that come when you set up your node group. So right now, roughness is 0, glossiness is 0.2, and the mix shader is halfway between this texture and this texture. By moving this, you change things. See how this is lighter and then it gets very dark? Okay, well, we want it lighter in this case. And we can also change these things too. Up here in the diffuse, I'm going to increase it a little bit. That looks good. And dirt isn't all that glossy, so I'm going to increase that a little bit too. There. Now that's really starting to look like rough dirt. We're going to call that good for now. Now let's take a look at our pot texture. Over at the material pane, we click on pot. Here's our pot texture. Let's move this so that we can see the pot a little bit better. We don't care about the dirt right now. And there's our pot texture. Just for fun, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did before with the displacement. Now you can really tell on this one how bumpy that is. See how bumpy that is? And it also made it darker. In this case, I don't really like all that bump on the pot. If you wanted it to be very rustic and old, and then maybe that would be okay, but I don't really like that. So I'm going to do a little trick that basically turns down the bumpiness. To do that, I'm going to add color, mix RGB, and just put the node pane on top of the line there, and it automatically puts it where it's supposed to go. That's very handy. Now I can adjust this one way or the other to make it more or less bumpy. In this direction, you can see it's just a little bumpy. Not very bumpy, but a little bumpy. So I'm going to leave that there, not because I love it, but just so that you'll understand how it works. The other thing that we can change is we can make this glossier. If you want something to be glossier, down here in the glossy shader, okay, that's this guy here, it says glossy, you move the roughness all the way down in this direction, usually under 0.1. And see how that's starting to get glossy? So now we've got gloss and we've got displacement at the same time. You can of course get different effects by playing with the sliders here and here and here. You can also change from a mixed shader to multiply. Change the white color to black, and then you get a different look. And again, as you move this, things are going to change. I think I like that a little better. So what if we want to change the saturation of our pot? We can do that. Add, color, hue and saturation, and I stuck it up here in between, a little hard to tell. Move those down. I put this in between our image texture and our diffuse, okay, hue saturation value. So you can turn the saturation down. That's quite pretty. You can also turn it up. I like down better. You can play with the value. Value is lightness and darkness. Now that looks very different from our original texture, doesn't it? So you can do all sorts of things. So by playing around with your whole node group, and I do mean playing, it should be fun, you can get all sorts of different looks just from one texture. And that's a pretty exciting thing. Since we haven't made any changes to our mapping, we can go ahead and bake again from our original setup. Let's go back to material mode because it's so much easier on our computer. Again, we need to make sure that we have the image texture that we want to bake to highlighted for both textures. I'm going to go to edit mode and we're going to bake. I'm going to be brave and bake at 400 since I know it's all set up fine, and I'll be back in just a minute. Now we're going to save our texture again. Image, save as image. Now here's something kind of important, maybe not in the future, but right now. There's a bug in Blender, and whenever you bake to the same texture twice, or even try to save the same texture twice without rebaking, it changes it to alpha. And we don't want it to be alpha. So whenever you go to save your texture, make sure that it says RGB before you save. I'm going to call this Pot with Dirt 512 Light. And we'll save that. So that's really important. Unfortunately, there's nothing that you can do but be aware of the problem at this point in time. Since we haven't made any changes at all to the mapping, we don't need to upload our pot again. We just need to go out to the beta grid and see how this looks. Here are our two pots uploaded in World, slightly different, slightly individual. There's lots and lots of things you can do just by playing around with that same node group that I showed you. And here are a few examples of other things that you can do with that same setup.